There is a quiet kind of punishment that does not use fists or shouting. It comes wrapped in polite words and careful smiles. It signs papers, shakes hands, and calls cruelty discipline. On a cold frontier morning in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a respected household decided to correct a daughter's defiance by selling her future to humiliation. At that same moment, a quiet young man was bent over honest labor in a stable across town. He did not know that his name had already been chosen, not as a husband, but as a warning. Neither of them knew that by nightfall, the punishment meant to break one of them would begin changing both of their lives forever. The Kelly household stood 2 blocks from the territorial courthouse, a large home built from cattle money and protected by reputation. Inside, the parlor smelled faintly of beeswax and polished wood. Carmen Kelly stood near the tall window. She was 22 years old, dressed in a dark blue dress, buttoned high at the throat. Her brown hair was pinned neatly behind her head with no decoration. Her posture was straight and composed. Across the room sat her father, Reginald Kelly. At 53, he was a tall man with broad shoulders and a voice that expected obedience. He sat comfortably in his leather chair, as if the entire room belonged to him. Between them sat Lawrence Boyer, a wealthy landowner who had recently lost his wife. He leaned forward slightly on the sofa, studying the room with the quiet confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. Afternoon sunlight filtered through lace curtains and stretched across the rug on the floor. Your father tells me you enjoy reading," Boyer said, while looking at the bookshelf behind Carmen. "I do," Carmen answered calmly. "Novels, I assume. Sentimental things women usually prefer." Carmen shook her head slightly. "Philosophy, some poetry, and history when I can find it." Boyer smiled the way men do when they believe they know better. "A wife rarely has time for books, Miss Kelly. My household runs on strict order. Breakfast at 6 each morning, supper at 7. I employ 8 people who depend on proper timing." Carmen's fingers tightened gently against her skirt. "And what schedule does conversation follow, Mr. Boyer?" The clock above the fireplace ticked loudly. Her father froze with his teacup halfway to his mouth. Boyer frowned slightly. "I'm not certain I follow." "You have been in this room for 23 minutes, Carmen said calmly. "You spoke with my father about cattle prices, railroads, and politics. You addressed me twice." She looked at him directly. "You asked a question and did not wait for my answer. Then you explained how your household operates. I was simply wondering when my thoughts might be invited into the arrangement." Silence filled the room. Her father slowly placed his teacup down. "Carmen," he said firmly, "apologize to Mr. Boyer immediately." She turned toward him. "For what exactly?" "For rudeness." "I asked a question." Boyer stood suddenly, his face flushed with irritation. "Reginald, I came here in good faith." "And you will have your answer," her father replied tightly. "Give us a moment." "Lawrence." Boyer grabbed his hat from the hallway and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with controlled force. The sound echoed through the house. Reginald Kelly stood slowly and looked at his daughter. "Do you understand what you've done? I spoke plainly. You embarrassed this family in front of a respected man." Carmen met his gaze without fear. "He never once asked what I thought about anything." Her father's jaw tightened. "You will marry. That fact is not up for discussion." "Then I choose not to marry him." The silence that followed felt heavy. Reginald Kelly did not slap his daughter. He never had. Instead, he did something worse. He smiled. "Very well," he said quietly as he walked to his desk. "If Mr. Boyer does not meet your standards, then I will find someone you cannot possibly refuse." Carmen felt a cold knot form in her stomach. What does that mean? He pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer and dipped his pen into ink. You will marry within the week. Her heart began to pound. But not to a man of wealth or position. The pen scratched across the page. I will post a notice in town and at the church. He paused just long enough for her to understand. Any unmarried man willing to take you as wife may accept. Her breath caught. The first man who agrees will be your husband. You would never do that, she whispered. Reginald folded the paper carefully. Let us see how philosophical you feel while washing another man's floors. Her hands trembled behind her back. People will talk. Let them. His eyes were cold. They will say I tried to arrange a respectable marriage for my daughter. They will say she refused with shocking rudeness. He placed the paper into his jacket. And they will say I gave her to a working man because pride must be corrected. Carmen stared at him. This is cruelty. This is consequence. He stepped closer. You will accept this marriage, or you will leave this house tomorrow with nothing. Her throat tightened. No money, no protection, no family name. He turned toward the door. A woman alone on the frontier learns humility very quickly. The door closed behind him. Carmen stood alone in the quiet parlor. 3 days later, the notice was removed. Only one man had responded. His name was Coulter Morse. He worked in the stables behind the Frontier House Hotel on West 17th Street. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered from lifting hay and cleaning stalls. When the clerk at the territorial office summoned him, Coulter arrived still smelling faintly of horses and leather. The nervous clerk adjusted his glasses. Mr. Morse, there has been a situation. Coulter waited quietly. Reginald Kelly posted a notice offering his daughter in marriage. Coulter frowned slightly. Why me? You were listed in the census as unmarried. The clerk cleared his throat. Mr. Kelly selected you. Understanding settled over Coulter slowly. Men with money did not marry their daughters to stable hands, unless humiliation was the entire point. What did she do? Coulter asked. Refused a wealthy match. Coulter nodded once. But when is the wedding? Tomorrow afternoon. The ceremony lasted 9 minutes. Judge Harlan read the words quickly in his small office. Do you, Coulter Morse, take Carmen Kelly as your lawful wife? I do. Do you, Carmen Kelly, take Coulter Morse as your lawful husband? She hesitated, then answered quietly, I do. Her father shook Coulter's hand afterward. Take care of her, he said loudly enough for the witnesses to hear. She is completely your responsibility now. Coulter said nothing. Carmen walked out of the courthouse without looking back. An hour later, they reached Coulter's small cabin outside Cheyenne. It was simple. 1 room, a stove, a table, a bed in the corner. Coulter carried her trunk inside and placed it gently near the bed. This is it. Carmen stood quietly in the doorway. After a moment, she asked softly, Where will you sleep? Coulter pointed toward the loft above. Up there. Her brow furrowed. That is not necessary. It is to me. She looked at him in confusion. We are married. Legally, he said calmly, but I am not taking anything that was forced. The words surprised her. Most men would not have said that. He picked up a blanket from the bed. Bed is yours. Then he climbed the ladder without waiting for another word. Carmen stood alone in the cabin. The quiet was different from the silence in her father's house. It was not cold, just unfamiliar. For the first time since the wedding, she felt something unexpected. Relief. And somewhere above her in the loft, Coulter lay awake staring at the ceiling. Wondering why a woman who had every reason to hate him had looked at him with such quiet kindness, He did not understand it yet, but before long, he would begin asking her the same question every night. Why are you this sweet? And that question would change both of their lives. The first week of their marriage passed in quiet, careful distance. Coulter left before sunrise each morning. The cold air of Wyoming bit at his face as he walked toward the Frontier House stables, where the smell of hay and horses welcomed him back to familiar work. Carmen usually woke after he was already gone. At first, she would sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the small cabin around her. The wooden walls, the iron stove, the rough table with 2 chairs. Yet it was a different world from the polished floors and lace curtains of her father's house. But it was clean. Everything had a place. Nothing was wasted. She began slowly learning the small rhythms of the cabin. The pump outside provided water, though it took effort to carry the bucket back inside. The stove required patience and practice. Too much wood, and the room filled with smoke. Too little, and the fire died. The first few meals she cooked were disasters. One evening, she burned potatoes so badly that the smell filled the cabin for an hour. Another time, the bread refused to rise and came out of the oven hard as stone. When Coulter returned that night, tired from work, he looked at the bread quietly. Then he picked up a knife and tried cutting a slice. The blade barely made a dent. Carmen felt her face heat with embarrassment. "You do not have to pretend," she said. "It is terrible." Coulter examined the loaf again. "I have seen worse." "You are lying." He shook his head. "My first bread was worse than this. The stable master tried using it to hammer a nail." Carmen looked at him in surprise. "You are joking." "Only slightly." For a moment she laughed. It was the first time since the wedding that real laughter filled the cabin. After that night, Coulter began quietly helping her learn. He never corrected her sharply. Instead, he showed her things slowly. How to adjust the stove damper, how long potatoes needed to cook, how much salt to add to broth. One evening, while she struggled again with the fire, he crouched beside the stove and adjusted the logs carefully. "Jeet, you have to listen to it," he said. "Listen to a stove?" "Yes." He tapped the iron gently. "It will tell you if it is angry." Carmen looked skeptical. "You are serious?" "Very." She stared at him for a moment before shaking her head. "You might be the strangest man I have ever met." "Probably." But the stove behaved better after that. Days passed, then weeks. Their life settled into quiet routines. Coulter worked long hours. Carmen kept the cabin in order. Supper was eaten together each evening at the small table. They spoke little at first, but slowly the silence between them changed. It stopped feeling awkward. It began to feel comfortable. One Sunday morning, Carmen woke and discovered Coulter was not in the loft. She stepped outside and followed the sound of water. Yet behind the cabin, a narrow creek flowed through the grass. Coulter knelt beside it, scrubbing a shirt against a flat rock. She stopped in surprise. "You wash your own clothes?" Coulter glanced up. "They get dirty." "I meant most men do not do laundry." He dipped the shirt back into the cold water. "I lived alone since I was 15. He wrung the fabric carefully. "Clothes still get dirty whether a man knows how to wash them or not." Carmen walked closer and sat on a nearby rock. "May I try?" He handed her another shirt. 20 minutes later, she had stretched one sleeve nearly twice its proper size and turned another shirt gray after washing it with a blue bandana. Coulter took them back without complaint. "You are learning," he said. "I am destroying your wardrobe." "My wardrobe was never impressive." Carmen laughed again. It came easier now. They walked back to the cabin together, carrying the basket of wet clothes. That evening, something changed between them. After supper, Carmen opened a book she had brought from her trunk. Coulter watched her quietly for a long time. Finally, she noticed. Do you read? A little. How little? Enough to sign my name. Prices on a supply list. Not much else. Carmen closed the book slowly. Would you like to learn more? Coulter hesitated. Hope flickered across his face, but he seemed unsure whether he deserved it. You would teach me. If you want to learn. He nodded. I would. That night, Carmen cleared the table and placed a sheet of paper under the lamp. Start with your name, she said gently. Coulter held the pencil awkwardly at first. His large hands looked clumsy around the small tool. He carefully wrote the letters. Coulter. The T leaned slightly crooked. Carmen smiled. That is good. They practiced every night after that. First the alphabet, then simple words, then short sentences. Coulter learned quickly. His concentration was intense, the same focus he used while working with horses. Sometimes he grew frustrated, but Carmen never mocked him. She corrected him patiently, encouraged him quietly. One evening, she handed him a short poem to read. Coulter sounded out the words slowly. Then he stopped. His ears turned red. Is this supposed to sound like that? Carmen looked down at the page and realized too late what she had chosen. The poem was romantic, but Coulter cleared his throat. Your hands, which I have held, are small against the evening light. He stopped again. Carmen reached quickly for the paper. I forgot which poem it was. Their fingers brushed. Both of them froze. The small cabin suddenly felt very warm. Coulter looked at her differently then. Really looked. Why are you this sweet? He asked quietly. Carmen blinked. What? You teach me without laughing at me. You are patient when I struggle. His voice was soft but sincere. You could treat me like I am foolish. She shook her head slowly. I would never do that. Why not? Carmen searched for an answer, but none came easily. I do not know, she whispered. He studied her face for another moment. Then he carefully placed the paper aside. I think I should stop for tonight. He climbed the ladder to the loft. Carmen remained at the table, staring at the abandoned poem. Neither of them slept well that night. After that evening, everything between them changed. Their glances lingered longer. Their conversations grew easier. Sometimes, their hands touched when passing plates at supper. Neither of them pulled away immediately. Winter arrived early that year. Heavy snow covered the land by late October. Work at the stable slowed. Travelers avoided the roads. Coulter's hours were reduced. His wages dropped from $12 a month to $7. Money became tight. Food had to stretch further. Carmen noticed something quickly. Coulter always served her first at supper. Her plate was always slightly fuller. His portions slowly grew smaller. You are not eaten enough, she told him one evening. I am fine. You are lying. He simply shook his head. But she could see the truth. His face grew thinner. Dark shadows appeared under his eyes. He worked long hours while giving her most of the food. Carmen began secretly reducing her own portions too. They both pretended not to notice what the other was doing. One cold afternoon, a traveling merchant named Patterson stopped by their cabin selling supplies. Carmen bought a small bag of cornmeal with the last coins she had saved. Patterson tipped his hat politely. Your husband is a fortunate man, Mrs. Morse. She smiled politely. Thank you. He is lucky to have a woman who can make a meal from so little. When Patterson left, Carmen went inside. Coulter stood by the stove. His expression was tight. Something wrong? She asked. No. But his voice sounded different. That evening he spoke very little. The next morning she stopped him before he could leave for work. What is bothering you? Nothing. Coulter. He looked away. Finally he said quietly, he called me lucky. You are lucky. That is not the point. He gestured around the small cabin. You deserve better than this. Understanding dawned on her slowly. You were jealous. He did not deny it. Carmen stepped closer. I do not want anyone else. You should. I do not. She reached for his hand. I think about you when I cook. I think about making sure you have enough to eat. Her voice softened. I think about how kind you are. Coulter stared at her. Something inside him finally broke. He pulled her close and kissed her. The kiss was sudden and full of everything they had both been holding back. When they finally separated, both of them were breathless. I love you, Coulter said quietly. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, but he stepped back. I am still sleeping in the loft. She looked confused. Why? Because when we share a bed, he said softly. I want it to be because we both chose it. He touched her cheek gently, not because someone forced it. Carmen nodded slowly, and that night, as he climbed the ladder to the loft again, she realized something unexpected. What the punishment meant to break her had given her something far greater. A man who treated her with more respect than she had ever known. And every night before sleep, Coulter still found himself thinking about the same question. Why are you this sweet? 3 weeks after the snow began falling, Coulter asked her to marry him. Not because the law said they were husband and wife, but because he wanted it to be real. They were eating breakfast that morning, a small bowl of cornmeal mush, shared between them with a little molasses on top. Coulter set his spoon down slowly. Carmen. Yes? I want to marry you. She smiled gently. We are already married. He shook his head. We signed papers in an office because your father forced it. He reached across the table and took her hand. Now that was not a choice. His blue eyes held hers. I want to stand somewhere and promise you everything, because I want to, because I love you. Her throat tightened. You already do that every day. Still, he said quietly, will you marry me again? Properly this time? Tears filled her eyes. Yes. Coulter smiled in a way she had never seen before. It transformed his whole face. 2 weeks later, they walked through the snow together, toward Judge Harlan's small home. There were only a few people gathered inside, the stable master and his wife, the woman who owned the general store, a few neighbors. Even Patterson, the traveling merchant, had stopped by. Carmen wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself from an old piece of fabric. Her hair was pinned neatly with the silver combs her mother once gave her, but Coulter wore a new gray shirt he had saved money to buy. Judge Harlan stood by the fireplace holding his book. This marriage, he said warmly, is entered into freely. The word freely carried weight. Coulter never took his eyes off Carmen. Do you take Carmen as your wife? I do. Do you take Coulter as your husband? Carmen smiled through her tears. I do. Then by the authority vested in me, the judge said, I pronounce you husband and wife. This time when Coulter kissed her, everyone in the room clapped. Afterward, they shared cake and coffee while laughter filled the house. For the first time since the forced wedding, Carmen truly felt married. That night, the cabin felt different. Warmer. Full of quiet excitement. Coulter closed the door and turned toward her slowly. You are sure about this? I have never been more sure. He stepped toward her and kissed her gently, not with desperation this time, but with tenderness, with patience, with love. Later they lay together beneath the quilt, wrapped in warmth while the winter wind howled outside. Coulter brushed a strand of hair from her face. Why are you this sweet? He whispered. Carmen smiled softly. Because you make it easy. He pulled her closer. I love you. I love you too. Winter passed. Spring slowly returned to Wyoming. The snow melted. Grass began to grow again. And one morning, Carmen told him the news. She was pregnant. Coulter froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. You are certain? She nodded with a shy smile. His chair scraped loudly as he stood, and then he wrapped his arms around her tightly. We are having a baby. He laughed with pure joy before kneeling beside her chair. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. Hello in there, he whispered. I am your father. Carmen wiped happy tears from her eyes. Their daughter Annie was born the following November. She arrived with a loud cry and a full head of dark hair. Coulter held the tiny baby carefully, afraid he might drop something so small. She is perfect, he whispered. Carmen smiled from the bed. What should we name her? Coulter looked at the child, then back at his wife. Annie. Carmen nodded softly. Annie Morse. Life changed quickly after that. The small cabin filled with the sound of a baby crying, laughing, and learning to walk. Coulter worked harder than ever. The stable owner noticed his honesty and dedication. Soon, Coulter became assistant manager. His pay increased. Food became easier to afford. Carmen planted a larger garden. Chickens wandered near the cabin. Meals improved. Their daughter grew strong and curious. 2 years later, another baby arrived, a boy named Evan. Where Annie was calm and thoughtful, Evan was loud and energetic from the moment he was born. The cabin filled with noise, toys scattered across the floor, little footsteps running through the rooms. Coulter loved every moment of it. One summer evening, years after the forced marriage, he and Carmen sat together on the small porch he had built beside the cabin. The sun was setting across the Wyoming plains. Golden light stretched across the fields. Do you ever think about how this started? Carmen asked softly. Sometimes. That my father tried to punish me. Coulter squeezed her hand gently. His plan failed. She laughed quietly. It certainly did. He tried to humble you by marrying you to a stable hand. Coulter looked at her with a smile. Instead, he gave you to me. She leaned against his shoulder. And you gave me everything. He kissed her forehead. We built it together. Inside the house, their children laughed while playing near the table. Coulter listened to their voices and felt something deep inside his chest. Gratitude. Years later, news arrived that Reginald Kelly had died. A letter came from the family lawyer. Carmen read it silently, then handed it to Coulter. How do you feel? He asked gently. She thought for a moment. I am sad. He never knew his grandchildren. She looked toward the house where Annie and Evan were playing. But I am not sad about the life we built. Coulter wrapped his arms around her. Neither am I. Time continued moving forward. Their stable business grew. Carmen began teaching children in town how to read. Their home filled with books. Their children grew tall and strong. And every night when the house grew quiet, Coulter still asked the same question. One evening they sat together under the stars outside their home. Carmen rested her head on his shoulder. Do you remember the first question you ever asked me? She said softly. Of course. He smiled. Why are you this sweet? Do you know the answer now? Coulter thought for a moment. Yes. He turned toward her. You are sweet because you choose kindness even when life is hard. He brushed his fingers gently along her cheek. You choose patience when anger would be easier. Her eyes filled with emotion. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is the truth. She leaned closer and kissed him softly. Then she whispered a question back to him. Why are you this sweet? Coulter laughed quietly. Because you taught me how. She shook her head. You were kind from the beginning. He pulled her closer beneath the wide Wyoming sky. Then we were both lucky. No, Carmen said gently. Not luck. She squeezed his hand. Choice. They had chosen each other every single day, and the punishment meant to break them had instead built something stronger than anyone could have imagined. Love, patient, stubborn, and chosen. Every day.